If Viking timber rotted the way modern outdoor wood does, there would be almost nothing left to study. Yet ship timbers pulled from seabeds, stave church posts exposed to snow and rain, and farm structures in the far north still show dense, resilient wood fibres after centuries of abuse. This survival was not accidental. Vikings lived in one of the harshest timber-killing climates on Earth, and they developed a system that treated wood as a living material long after the tree was cut. What you're about to hear is not folklore or romantic exaggeration. It is a practical method that worked through repeated winters, freeze-thaw cycles, salt air, and constant moisture. Stay with this explanation, because once you understand this system, modern wood failure becomes easy to diagnose and prevent. Why Viking builders never trusted raw wood to survive on its own. Vikings assumed that untreated wood would fail. They did not expect timber to endure rain, snow, and ground moisture without intervention. This assumption shaped their entire building process. Preservation was not a final step, but the foundation of construction itself. Their goal was not to seal wood away from nature, but to control how it interacted with water, fungi, and insects. This mindset is the first secret most modern builders lack. How tree selection and harvest timing created rot-resistant timber from the start. Vikings favoured slow-grown trees from cold regions. These trees produced tight growth rings, dense fibres, and fewer internal voids where moisture could collect. They also harvested during winter dormancy, when sap content was at its lowest. Sap feeds decay organisms. By cutting trees when sap was reduced, Vikings removed much of rot's fuel before construction even began. Today, this principle can be applied by selecting dense species and avoiding freshly cut, sap-heavy wood for outdoor use. Why Viking seasoning methods hardened wood instead of weakening it? Fresh timber was never rushed into service. Logs were stored raised above ground, shielded from direct precipitation, and left to season slowly in moving air. This prevented surface checking while allowing internal moisture to escape evenly. Slow seasoning really mattered because, well, uneven drying creates cracks that can trap water for decades. The Vikings, you see, avoided this very trap through patience. And, modern builders can actually replicate this by air-drying exterior timbers, instead of relying exclusively on rapid kiln drying. How pine tar became the backbone of Viking wood preservation is quite fascinating. One of the most important Viking techniques was the use of pine tar. Now, this was not paint or varnish. Pine tar was cooked slowly from resin-rich wood and then applied warm in thin layers. Pine tar penetrates deeply into wood fibres, repelling water while still remaining breathable. It discourages fungal growth and insects, but without sealing moisture inside. Viking ships coated with pine tar survived saltwater immersion, ice and storms that would destroy most modern coatings. For practical use today, heating pine tar gently and brushing it onto dry wood allows it to soak in. Reapplication every few years maintains protection without build-up. Why did controlled charring strengthen timber instead of burning it? Well, the Vikings used fire with real precision. Light charring of wood surfaces closed pores, killed surface organisms, and altered the chemistry of the outer layer. The charred surface in turn resisted moisture absorption and insect damage. This was not burning wood to ash. It was, in fact, brief exposure, followed by brushing and oiling. Modern survivalists and builders still use this method on fence posts and beams, achieving decades of added lifespan without chemicals. So, let's talk about how Viking construction design, managed to keep timber dry even in constant rain. Viking buildings were built to shed water aggressively. Their roofs were steep, the overhangs were wide, and interestingly, the wood rarely touched bare soil. Structural posts would rest on stone footings, and the walls were carefully designed to dry quickly after storms. Water was always expected, but standing moisture simply was not tolerated. This design philosophy really allowed wood to cycle between wet and dry without succumbing to decay. If we apply this today, it means lifting wood off ground contact, increasing roof overhangs, and making sure there's good airflow around structural members. Now, as for why Viking joinery allowed wood to move without breaking its protection. Well, Viking builders used joinery that respected the natural movement of wood. Peg joints, scarf joints, and compression fits all allowed for expansion and contraction through the seasons. Iron fasteners were used sparingly just to avoid creating moisture traps. Modern rigid fastening often creates these hidden rot zones where condensation forms around metal. Viking joinery avoided this by letting wood behave naturally, which in turn extended the structural life. Now, how did repetition through seasons make Viking timber stronger over time? Well, because Viking wood was allowed to dry fully after wetting, the fibres stabilized rather than degraded. Over the years, the timber actually hardened. The combination of seasoning, breathable protection and intelligent design allowed wood to age without failing. So this explains really why Viking structures actually improved with time instead of, just collapsing from internal decay. Why does this Viking system still matter for modern builders and survivalists? Well, the Viking timber secret was never just a single trick. No, it was a complete philosophy. Reduce rot's food supply, control moisture movement, allow drying, and, importantly, design structures that work with nature rather than against it. These principles, they remain valid, whether you're restoring a historic building, constructing an off-grid shelter, or simply protecting tools and equipment outdoors. Modern chemicals quite often only mask problems. Viking methods, on the other hand, solved them right at the source. If this deep breakdown of Viking timber survival added real value to your knowledge, do subscribe to Backyard Wisdom for more practical history that still works today. Share this guide with anyone who builds, restores, or prepares for the long term, because truly, wood that survives centuries begins with understanding, not just products.